Hello everyone, seat of the pants today, seat of the pants, trying to get this all together. What a run round we've had. Anyway, welcome to an evening talking about dehydrators. I know that I said in the introduction there we'd have a Q&A at the end, but Rose quite rightly suggested that perhaps as we go through the different stages, excuse me, you might want to chip in with some of the questions as we go along. So of course we do have the lovely Rose, give the camera a wave, Rosie, in the chat room there. She's going to try and answer whatever questions that come through sort of immediately, or comments as it were, and I'll go through and try and demonstrate the system as it were. Right, I think probably what the best thing to do is first of all show you what a dehydrator is. In fact, no, I will start before that. People watching, well, I've got my pad. Could you pass me with the iPad please, Rose? It's on your right hand side there. Thank you very much. I've got all the comments coming in here from Facebook and YouTube, so I'll first of all say hello to everybody. Danny Denny, I'm not sure where he's after, it says where is mine. Davey, Rambling Tog, Gordon Jackson, Phil Winter, hi guys. Ian McDougall again, nice to see you, thanks Ian, Liz Gray, David B and Rady Ryder. Anyway, so hi guys, welcome for joining, and if you're watching this in the future, welcome again. Do try and pop along and join in with the chat and when we do it live, which would be great. Perhaps next week. We've got some interesting things coming next week. So, right, first things first, what is a dehydrator? And I'll give it a little brief bit of history. Let's just move a few things out of the way. Various gatherings of food to show you exactly what a dehydrator will do. I'll put that over there. Now, let's have a look. This little beauty. Some 30 years ago, I'm not possibly that old, it must have been a relation of mine, I saw a little advert in the back of TGO magazine which was talking about dehydrators, but the only place you could find them was New Zealand. And this company, Harvester, was making dehydrators, Harvest made in New Zealand. So we imported one, and that's where our journey to dehydrators started. Now, briefly show you this, because in all honesty in 30 years very little has actually changed. They still look very similar, they all do a very similar job with a few other features perhaps, so perhaps a brief introduction to give you an idea. Now this is a vertical one. There's two types basically, there's a vertical and horizontal. As I say, this is 30 years old, but the principle is still the same. So if we just look over the top of the camera there, they all consist of a variety of trays. The current one that's very similar to this is the Stockley, which we'll come on to and demonstrate at some stage. Let's get these things out. I would have had this all prepared, but it's been a little bit of a rush tonight. And that's the gist of it. So basically what you have at the base is a small element inside here, a fan, and that then circulates a very low steady temperature of heat for as long as you want it to be. And on top of these trays you naturally place your foods, oops, I will drop the trays, your foods to dry. Now that's lovely if you're doing something like flowers and that type of thing, but obviously when you start getting into finer things for outdoors people in particular, foods and that type of thing, you want to have either a solid tray or a finer mesh, and they tend to come with a variety of options like that. So that is basically the principle. As I say, this one is rather old. It does have, it still works, and in fact I was looking on eBay today and saw a couple for sale, which was phenomenal. But the modern day version is the Stockley, which is this one here, and as you can see it's 120 quid, but we'll come on to the cost element in a bit. And the principle with these ones is exactly the same. As you can see, it's got trays, you can add trays to it, but there's no central hole as there is in this old-fashioned one. They're much more, the airflow is much more effective and efficient. So that's the vertical one. I'll show you the other one and then I'll tell you what the primary difference is between it. Let me just move that out of the way and bring in the beast, which is Rose's favourite dehydrator, and you can see straight away this is a horizontal one. It's a bit better. And the principle's the same. You have trays. On that tray you can either be completely open, you can have a mesh. I'm doing this obviously blind, so I'm not too sure what's in here. Oh yeah, and then you can get these are called Paraflex. It's just the name of the material sheet which goes on the tray, which when you're doing wet food, sauces and that type of thing, it won't obviously dribble through. But can you see? Let's do the up top camera perhaps. With this one, you look inside it there, you can see just at the back there's a fan and the element. And so what that tends to do is obviously that draws the air through from the back out through the front, and in the process dries the contents. Now they're roughly, the Excalibur's a bit of a beast, it's a big one, so they're roughly the same type of size as regards the amount of desk space or kitchen space they take up. The primary difference that I found in the 30 years that we've had them with that older one, or that one where it draws the air from underneath, if you have a work surface like this work surface, which is real wood, not a laminate, it draws the air with the moisture through the machine. And when I moved house, after having it there for a good 10 or 15 years, I realised it had sucked all the moisture out of the work surface as well. So that was one thing. The other thing is the trays, with a vertical one like the ring one, the trays have to be rotated because naturally heat rises and it generally gathers towards the top. So over a period of time, you're advised to swap the trays over to get an even distribution of heat. The other thing about them is the Excalibur has got, let's show that again, the Excalibur has got a wider range here of heating temperatures, and it's also got a timer. Some come with a timer, some come without a timer. I'll come on to the timer issue in a minute. It's not a big deal, it's just an extra feature that saves you having to remember to turn it off. The range of temperatures that the Excalibur offers allows raw foodies.
Yeah, so it's basically raw foodies. People who like just raw food really love the Excalibur because it dehydrates at a much lower temperature, and so doing it, food maintains more of its enzymes. So a lot of people much prefer it for that reason.
But it is £100 more than the Stockley. And let's just do a few basic sums. Where's my dried food gone? Right. So if we take our typical outdoor activity for one or possibly two people, you will naturally want a breakfast, possibly a lunch, and definitely an evening meal. And generally that would be a main meal plus a pudding of some kind, I guess. That's sort of the average thing we do. Now, looking at Summit to Eat, for example, they are a great brand. The food is excellent. I've got nothing negative to say about them. And it does taste extremely good, freeze-dried food. But you're looking at a single 5-bean cassoulet there. I think the going rate, I've just looked them up quickly, is about £5, £5.50. So for a solo hiker, backpacker, whatever, outdoors person, you're looking at £15-ish, £20 a day. If there was two of you going, you're at least looking at £25 a day for a range of foods. The other thing is you sort of consider, of course, is the packaging. So that's the packaging for the Summit, and that's a two-person meal there next to it. Where are we? Camera, about there. That's a two-person meal. So a one-person meal would be half that. Now we tend to use these pour and store bags. We've got a whole variety here because they've been sitting in the freezer for ages. Pour and store bags, because we can reuse them, recycle them, and keep using them during whatever trip that we're doing. But from an environmental point of view, from a packaging point of view, there is that to consider. So coming back to the finances, first of all, 2 people, if you're looking around £25 for 2 people for a day, a long weekend or a week away, you're going to be looking at 200 quid easily. Plus, of course, you know, the usual fun things we do, like go to the pub. That all adds up. But that's aside. That's another story. Right. The one thing I did want to do was I was going to do a demonstration to show what the food looks like when it comes back. Now, let me just go to the slides and just go through some of the key reasons that you might want to consider a dehydrator. Naturally, from a diet point of view, there's a lot of people with allergies at the moment. A lot of people have a specialist diet. They have needs to be a specialist diet. There are the raw foodies who obviously you're not going to find raw food or prepared raw food for backpacking off the shelf somewhere. So it's great to have that and your choice of meal that you like. Rose has already mentioned the nutrients. Taste is another thing. Some of the other pre-packed meals can be a bit iffy in taste, but of course it's personal taste. The great thing about a dehydrator is, you know, what you're getting out of it is what you've put into it. So it's your ingredients, your taste, and your bulk. You might find that you are somebody that requires a large amount of nutrition, so you can create the portions to your own volumes. Plus, of course, then you come back to additives, and as I've already touched on, packaging as well. Now, what can you dehydrate? Well, we've been doing it, as I say, for 30 years, and we have drafted out a book which we've talked about many a times, but it is still nearing completion, as it has been for the last 2 or 3 years. But the gist of everything there is what we have done ourselves and achieved great results. So fruit, naturally, that's what you would expect from what you see in the shops and the shelves. But vegetables, salads, people don't realise you can actually dehydrate salads. You can do a whole variety of different types of trail mix. I'll come on and show you an example in a second. Fruit leathers, very popular. Again, I've got some here to show you. Jerky, another thing that's very popular. And I noticed the other day when I was in the supermarket, before all the COVID shutdown, just how expensive jerky was. Then you've got the herbs, obviously, sauces. You can make up a sauce. And the vegetarians would love the fact that you can do tofu. And obviously, you can do your carbohydrates as well. Just a second. Then you've got the meat and fish one-pot meals. There's 2 types of way of doing that, as we'll come on to. You can either have one complete meal together, or you can break the meal into components and so on. Then there's the added benefits that, again, we found a use for this over the years. Drying flowers. Well, Rose is a great gardener. She likes to dry her flowers and keep them. But we also had our daughters get married, and so we made all the confetti for the wedding, which went down really well with the hosts of the wedding party. So it was very organic and everybody liked it and had a great smell as well. From the cooking front, you've got the drying meringues, making crystallized fruit, foodie type gifts, which we do at Christmas time. And then you've got the proving dough, as well as something as fancy as kale crisps we found the other day.
Yeah, there's so many things. The other thing you can do too is perk stuff up. So if you've got some crisps a bit soggy, or your meringues got a bit sticky, you can dry them off. Popcorn too, if it's on soft next morning, hydrate and it vitalises it. It's back to proper popcorn again. And as Bob said, kale crisps were all the rage long ago, and
not cheap.
Not cheap, no. And literally, if you've got kale, we generally grow kale through the winter anyway, and just quick swill with a tiny bit of balsamic vinegar and pop the dehydrator, and very munchable.
Excellent. Okay, now let's just have a look at a couple of comments as we're going through here. As I said, I would do it bit by bit. Welcome to everybody again. Mark Jan, hi again. Flying Sprout, Photo Puppet, Jonathan Hitchin. Nice to see you, Jonathan. Photo Puppet, do you need a vacuum sealing machine as well? I'll come on to that. And does it keep well enough to just put it in a normal Ziploc bag? Excellent. Okay, yeah, we'll touch on the storage then. The advised route for safe keeping of the food is to keep it as airtight as possible in a dark, cool place. Now, traditionally, this has been putting food into a kilner jar, just, dried apples that you see on a shop shelf that are completely dried out, put it in a kilner jar and you put it in the cupboard. That is, if you haven't got any other facilities, that is the way to do it. If you keep it in a Ziploc bag, Ziploc bags are not airtight enough to guarantee the air and moisture won't slowly get back into it, and if it does, there's a danger of it going off or going rancid. So the rule of thumb that we've always used, and we found extremely successful, and we've found that, all these foods here, for example, all these foods here have been in the freezer now for over 2 years. So 2016 here, 2018, got more dates on there, 2018. And we would quite happily take these out and use them straight away. So obviously when you put them in a freezer, you're going to be freezing any moisture anyway, if there was any moisture left. So it really is something you don't really have to think about. Now, what you do have to think about with a dehydrator is the time element. There's a couple of practical things which people don't realise. First of all, the warm air that comes off the food carries the moisture, but it also carries the aroma. So it is something you need to consider. We were lucky enough to have a back kitchen. We've got a garage now, and when we dehydrate stuff, we put stuff in there because curry wafting through the house or whatever it may be isn't necessarily very pleasant. So that's the one thing really that I wanted to say on that score. Now, what I want to do is actually do a demonstration and show what one of these foods looks like when it is reconstituted. And I'll explain portions, etc. as I go into that. So Rose, could you just pop that kettle back on that's just down there, if you would? Just on the floor there. And we'll get the kettle up to boil. While she's doing that, I'll explain about how we work with portions. Now, if you can see here, I've got a pot cosy. I've just got a MSR pot and a standard mug. Now, when we actually cook a food, in fact, I haven't mentioned that, so perhaps I should just backtrack fractionally. When you're cooking food that you intend to dehydrate, you cook it as you would do normally and let it cool. You don't take it straight from the stove onto a dehydrator, because although the dehydrator's got a lower temperature, it is a continual thing, and the food has a tendency or possibility of continually cooking, which you don't want. So you want the food to cook first. Then what we do is we say, okay, that is, I'll take the spork out, that is a portion of food. It's 350 ml, a standard mug. So if we made a stew, for example, or a pasta sauce or something like that, we will count out the scoops that we've taken out of the pan and put onto the dehydrator. That way, when we've finished and it comes off the dehydrator, because the size of the packaging, that's what venison stew for one, that's a large portion there. The size of the packaging, you tend to forget, is that for one? Is that for two? I can't remember, which is the reason that we write on all the packaging now what it is we've actually done. Now, I was going to do, which one? Vegetable chili, I think, is probably. Now, that vegetable chili is for two. And if we were just to approximately half it, like that. Hey, I've got a job on Blue Peter. The point that I'm trying to make, if I just zoom in here, the point that I'm trying to make is, can you see that? I can see it with the light. Is the food that's in there, that is the food less the water for a healthy portion for one of this particular, I wish I had a light actually, I haven't got a torch, of this vegetable chili. I can just make it out there. It's probably not even a quarter across the base. So therefore, the liquid that's been removed from that is the amount of weight that we've saved, which potentially is around the 300 gram mark. If that's a 350 ml mug, That's 350 grams worth of water that would be in there. That's what we've saved, roughly about, say, 300. And now, when we come to rehydrate it, what we do is add the same amount of water that was left. Whoop. There you go. And a bit more for luck. So, that is now in the pot. Normally that would be on your stove, and you would obviously bring it to the boil. It may be that during the day you've added some water somehow to it. And we're popping that inside a pot cozy. Alexa? Oh, it's not switched on. I was going to ask Alexa to remind me. Right, can somebody remind me in the chat room in 20 minutes time? And we'll see what that looks like. To give you an idea of what the food actually looks like when it reconstitutes. Now, any other questions here coming through? Yes, indeed. There is a lot less than a cupful, Race. Norman's been using Dehydrator for 10 years, and I've seen him on the walk, and on the TGO challenge, and he's enjoyed his meals as much as I have. And people were saying that you didn't have any audio on your microphone, love, so perhaps speak up next time. Right, okay, so what shall I go on to now? The foods, we've touched on that. Let's give you an idea of some of the items that we have done here. So, certain things you can dehydrate raw, certain things you would cook. Now, can anybody tell me what, whoops, they are. Anybody tell me what those are? Well, the red bits are a reasonable large tomato. Were they marinated? Did you marinate the tomatoes?
Yeah, balsamic. It was with balsamic vinegar.
Balsamic vinegar. And this is just a raw cauliflower floret, which somebody told me about when I met them on the TGO challenge one day, and we tried one for taste, and it was absolutely phenomenal. So for a trail mix, we chuck some of this in. It's gorgeous. It really does give it a zing, and it beats the old peanuts and chocolate all the time. On the fruit front, I've got obviously a mixed bag of fruits here. Let's just take a handful out. Some strawberries here somewhere.
I think there's some pear, apple, melon, strawberry.
Right.
And all the fruit, actually, sugar content is to intensify, so drying your fruit. Sweet.
There. Oh, right, there is no audio on you, I've just realised. Right, so I will repeat that. So as Rose was saying, was that's mango, that's apple, that's pear. Not too sure what that is.
Pineapple.
Pineapple, is it? It intensifies the sweetness on the taste of the fruit, and as you can see, reduces it right down. Right, I need to plug Rose in because she's got a lot of useful things to add to this. So just bear with me a second while I plug her in. Okie dokie, so cauliflowers, yeah, well done Liz Gray, you spotted it. Cauliflowers and tomatoes, Cam Hikes, is indeed Cam, and lovely and tasty it is too. Right, does anybody have any other questions touching on the subject so far that I've mentioned? Do drop me a note in here. Anything particular? I see other people are suggesting different ones. Norman Reeves, is that the one you're using at the moment, Norman? Nesco, American Harvest? Excellent. Okay, so we've touched on storage. We've touched on the foods. Let me just give you an example of this one. This is obviously this is pasta. With pasta, we found that it is best and actually works faster to cook it as you would do at home normally, refresh it as you would do at home normally. If you're going to add some pesto or something to it, do that at home normally, and then when it's cooled down, dehydrate it. So that when you actually then come to rehydrate, what you would do is put the main sauce, as I've suggested, in the pan, get that to rehydrate through, and then you might just drop the pasta in at the very end, pop it on the heat for a couple of minutes to get it to a rolling boil, and the pasta reconstitutes really, really quickly. Much quicker than the sort of 10-12 minutes that we were thinking of when you would normally cook pasta from scratch.
It also reduces in size and weight slightly too, so you've got added advantage there as well.
Yeah, definitely. Not a vast amount, not as much as the water-based foods, but obviously every little helps, as they say. Now, going on from this, there are a couple of ways that people use dehydrators with food and how they then use it to cook with. Now, a lot of the books that are American, particularly the older books, which are American-based, tend to follow the style of what I call traditional camp cooking, which is where they take the raw ingredients, dehydrate the raw ingredients, and then take the packages of the raw ingredients to their hobo type camping, their what do they call it?
Bushcraft.
Well, not
sort of
bushcraft
or home camp.
Home camp, whatever it is. And basically they will cook traditionally. So they'll cook over a fire, and it'll then take a long time, but they're in no rush. The weather's on their side, and that's a traditional type of cooking. So when we first started doing this, we found a lot of the dehydration books and tips were all based on drying raw ingredients, as opposed to how we, as sort of outdoors people, generally would prefer to do things possibly a bit quicker. And as we often know, that sometimes you just want to eat, and you want to eat something very nutritious and warming and hearty as soon as possible, and sitting around a campfire waiting for something to happen isn't necessarily going to be what you want to do. So that I'd call that traditional camp cooking, old traditional style. Whereas on the backpacking front, or the hiking or paddling, whatever it may be, there are two ways of approaching it. You can either cook your meal as one meal as you would do, for example, a stew type of meal, or a pasta type of meal, or whatever, with the pasta and everything, and then you can dehydrate that, ready to rehydrate when you return, when you obviously want to eat. That works, but sometimes because of the component parts in there, the complete meal takes longer to rehydrate, and some part of it is perhaps not as enjoyable as the other. I have to say, I don't want to give the illusion that the food is absolutely perfect every time when you rehydrate. It's a bit of a learning curve for all of us. We're still learning now. So sometimes the food that you get to eat isn't quite as soft and luscious as you'd hope it to be, but it's still food and it still goes down. And you'll learn yourself, really, if you get one, exactly what timing works for you. Now, the other way of doing it is a way that we've now moved on to, is cooking component parts. And by that, I mean you cook, for example, a tomato sauce. Now, that tomato sauce base, which you would put in your herbs and your stock, and make it a traditional base, as it were, can be the base for anything. It could be a base for a soup, it could be a base for a chili, it could be a base for a stew, it could be a base for pasta, etc., etc. So if you've got all the tomato sauce, a nice thick tomato sauce cooked, you can then look at your other packets which you may have. You might have, for example, if you were not a vegetarian, you might have some mince which you've cooked and dried, and that can be completely separate. You might have, well, we sometimes call it a herb bag or a spice bag. Well, I might have a bag where we put a variety of chili-based spices in there or whatever, which we've dried. So we think, okay, that night we'll have a mince. So add the mince to it, have a chili, add the chilies to it, and we've got the base for a chili. But because we all know when you're actually on the trail, your tastes change. Sometimes you prepare all these foods before you go, you think, fantastic, I'm looking forward to those meals. By the third or the fourth night, you say, I just don't feel like a curry tonight. That's all I've got. Well, actually, you can completely change it should you wish to do so. So with the pasta, with the tomato-based sauce, you can perhaps have a stew. You can perhaps add more vegetables to it, which you've dried separately. So it gives you a little bit more variety. So I'm not sure if I'm explaining it well enough, but what I'm trying to get across is that for every meal, for every trip that we do now, we might make 3 or 4 base sauces, and that will be the base of the meal. But then as separate to that, we will then have a handful of items, not many, just 2 or 3, that will change the meal depending on our taste at the time. And of course, as I say, the pot cozy is your friend on this sort of thing. It is a phenomenal, useful piece of very simple technology. A double pot cozy like this will keep food piping hot for, well over an hour, but certainly piping hot to eat in about 20 minutes, 30 minutes. So I shall look forward to seeing that when we finish. So coming back to that slide, not that one, but that one. The main principle being that you have to accept there is a certain amount of hassle. I think that's probably where we need to start next, actually, the hassle factor, the fiddle factor. There is a fiddle factor involved in this. Let's see if anybody else has made any comments before I come on to that. Trail mix, how to use the dehydrator, yeah, I'll come on to that, Cam, certainly. Okay, so let's just talk about the hassle factor, and actually I'll probably answer your point at the same time, Cam. The simple science of it is the smaller the pieces of food spread wider on a tray, which has warm air flowing either over it or underneath it coming through it, obviously the more effective and quicker the food will dry. Now, the hassle factor is obviously, we do a lot of cooking, so we'll quite happily make an extra 2 or 3 portions of tomato sauce, pasta sauce, whatever it may be. And then we'll use the mug system, scoop it out, put it on the dehydrator. You layer it as thin as you can. And I mean, just layer it like a very thin puddle, to be honest. And then you just switch it on and you leave it. Now, the temperatures are all vary depending on what it is you're actually dehydrating, but most dehydrators have got a dial on it with a temperature and also an indication of what it would be suitable for. And then we tend to put that on in the evening. Then the following morning, before we get up and start doing what we're ever doing for the day, we'll go and have a look at it. If it was, I'll keep coming back to the tomato sauce because it's a regular thing. If we'll look at the tomato sauce, and that will look like a sticky pancake. And then what we'll do is we'll peel it off the sheet and rip it up. You just rip it up. It's sticky. It's just rip it into slices and sort of turn it over. Back to the science of the more surface area, the better the dehydration and the more consistent it'll be. Now, the first thing to realise for people who are nervous about this is you can't over dehydrate something. Once the moisture is gone, the moisture's gone. You're not cooking the food anymore. You're not doing anything. I've left a dehydrator on 2 or 3 days. I went, oh, I've forgotten I've got something out there in the garage. So the main thing to realise is you can't over dehydrate. And when it comes to rehydrating, just the opposite happens. The food will only absorb the amount of moisture that it's lost, and the rest of the water will just not be absorbed. So the food will just look a bit sloppy. And as I say, if you get a rough system going, what works for you? We've used the standard mug because everybody's got a standard mug knocking around somewhere. That system works for us. Now, coming back to Cam's question about how to use a dehydrator, that's basically it, Cam, to be honest. With veggie foods, vegetable-based foods, and with purees, like we've got the puree here, Rose? Oh yeah, we've got some here. We've got a blackberry and apple here. This would take probably, we do it overnight. Bigger piece. Just a thin, you can see how thin it is there, look. So that's as thin as it was on the sheet. And we'll do it overnight. And as I say, in the morning we'll turn it over, rip it all up into pieces. It'll be sticky and tacky. This is now dry. And so when you touch this and pick it off the tray, it just doesn't stick to your fingers. It loses all tackiness, and that way you know it's dry. But we would then leave it on probably for the rest of the day. And as I say, probably forget about it and remind ourselves in the evening we've got the dehydrator switched on. The cost of running a dehydrator, somebody compared it to, once when I asked about it, as being like having a 40-watt bulb running overnight. So it isn't a vast cost. The fan that pushes the air through isn't a big powerful fan. It is just a very low steady heat. Somebody asked at the very beginning, before we went live, I noticed a comment saying, can you dehydrate food using a normal oven? The answer is yes, in principle. And again, having gone into this and discussed this with various people that have done it, the lowest setting on your cooker, and you leave the door open. So from an energy and efficiency and the cost point of view, it's considerably more expensive than having a 40-watt bulb running overnight. But that basically will do it. So you would literally do everything as I said, cook the food, prepare it, let it cool, spread it thinly on a tray. Of course, you've got to find the right sort of tray to put it on inside a stove. A metal tray isn't going to be particularly useful. And then you would dry it to a crisp. I love those. Oh, right. Lovely taste. Any other questions coming out of that little piece? No, nobody's commented more. Okay.
There was someone was just saying, so you can just cook your normal meal and stick half on the dehydrator. And I was saying, yes, if you've got a trip coming up, what we often do is just double up the portions. If we're having curry or a casserole, with a mind to put half of it on the dehydrator. And then obviously store it in the freezer until we need it. Obviously some foods dehydrate better than other, and it's not going to look, someone said to me, oh, Sunday lunch, and I was saying, well, yeah, but you wouldn't rehydrate a Sunday lunch, it just wouldn't look right. You have to be sensible about the meals that you can dehydrate, obviously. They're not going to come back exactly. Egg and chips is not going to be dehydratable. So, within reason, you can think about the food that you have at home that you will dehydrate and take that out on the hill. And there's a huge range of stuff. You can salmon and leek, or beef mustards, or vegetarian lasagnas, all sorts of stuff you can do.
Right, I think I've had, give or take, about 15, where I'll put this in the middle of the camera, there, for this to rehydrate, and I would say, probably looking at that, I put far too much water in. It was very much a guess coming out the freezer, but let's just taste it and see if it's got the constitution. Yeah. Okay, that's not bad actually. Oh, spicy too. Okay, so looking in here, as you can see, okay, it's watery, a fair cop. Perhaps that was actually a portion that we've already taken some stuff out of. We should have, that was a full portion. And
it was 20 minutes too, and you haven't sort of, we didn't boil it up, did we, either on a stove, which we normally would before we pot coated it.
That's edible. I mean, it's edible. It's soft, it's chewable. It is certainly more than enough to, yeah, that's a reasonable camp meal. No two ways about it. A bit watery, perhaps. So, obviously, based on experience, I would then do that slightly differently next time. But fine. So, as Rose was pointing out, egg and chips doesn't come back like egg and chips. Now, talking about, so let's talk about meat for a second. Red meat is definitely the most flexible and effective meat to work with. Either if you dry it, you marinate it I'll go back at stage. You slice it really thinly across the grain, not with the grain. You marinate it in your chosen marinades that you like, and you can dehydrate that to a crisp, and then it's a nice chewy jerky built on. You can use it in two ways. You can use it as a trail mix as you go along, which is great. Gives you something to do, nice burst of taste. Or you can pull it to pieces in the evening and drop it into your meal and let it reconstitute with the food that you've got there, and you've added the protein to your meal. Lamb isn't too bad. It can be a little bit harder, a bit tougher. The one which is the most surprising is probably turkey and chicken and duck. Duck in particular is very, very dry meat. Turkey and chicken need to be treated, cooked correctly, or cooked in a more dehydrator friendly way. By that I mean it's a very dry meat. So if you were to do a chicken stew, for example, and your chicken pieces were the size of some of these fruit pieces I've had on the table here, then when you reconstitute it, the rest of the meal will be done, but the chicken will still be really hard and tough. So the general recommendation is, if at all possible, is to get minced turkey mince, and with chicken to steam it or poach it rather than stew it and fry it. It makes the meat much more moist, and consequently then you can mix it in with your main stew, if it was a stew that you were making towards the end. The one to steer clear of, and there is a reason for this, and we were looking it up today and we both can't find it, but to steer clear away from pork. Pork has got a certain bug in it which can be reactivated very easily, and you don't want to be ill on the hill with something like that. You certainly wouldn't dehydrate chicken from raw. I've done it and had salmonella. That was a stupid thing to do. You can with red meat. Fish is tricky one. Generally, flaky white fish is good. Again, small pieces. You just got to break everything into small pieces. Oily fish you can do, but you've got to be very careful with oily fish. Seafood was the other one. Prawns. Prawns taste great, but you've really got to chop them fine, because even though they're small prawns that you might have in your dish, they're like little bullets, and sometimes they just seem to take forever to reconstitute. Rose?
I've forgotten what I was going to say now. I know what it was. I was going to say that the other thing we need to touch on is that obviously fatty foods are not so easy to dehydrate, because the fat in them remains, so that when you take them out of the dehydrator, there's more chance of them going rancid. So you can do so. So for example, we do a Thai green curry and the coconut milk, and that has quite a lot of fat in it. So if we're out on a trip, if we've got a Thai green curry with us, we will tend to use that sooner on the trip rather than later, to just minimise that chance of it going off quicker. And obviously other things like mackerel, which is quite an oily fish, if you've got a mackerel and gooseberry stew or that sort of thing, again, you would perhaps use that sooner rather than later.
The fatty foods cause people a lot of concern. So for example, if you were doing something like mince, or you were doing something that created a lot of fat in the actual cooking process, the advice is really to, if it was a mince for example, is to cook the mince, take it out of the pan, dry it on a paper towel as it were, to sort of soak up some of the oil, and then drop it back into your cooking. As Rose was saying about the curries, we found with red and green Thai curries, using the coconut milk actually hasn't been a problem. If at any stage during your cooking you have a pool of fat on the top of your pan, for example, then that's that you need to scoop that off. Basically, if you can see the fat in your pan while you're cooking whatever dish it is you're cooking, then that's the thing you need to remove if at all possible. In all the years that we've been doing it, as I say, it is 30 years, the years that we've been doing it, we've never had anything go rancid, have we?
Yeah, we have. I'm sure we did actually, because it was before we put stuff in the freezer there, and we kept it in our kitchen cupboard.
in a vacuum pack, and we found that one of the I've forgotten what it was a mackerel or I think it was an oily fish one, and we opened it and it just smelled awful. And that's basically the bottom line. If you do have a meal when you're out, then just make sure that you don't eat it. It's like you get something out of the fridge, and if it doesn't look right, it doesn't smell right, don't eat it.
Yeah, I would say certainly the reminder there, or to share a bit of information, would be you're not working in a clinical environment. You don't have to worry about being in a clinical environment, is what I'm trying to say. So that when obviously you've done your food, you've taken it to the dehydrator. As I say, we've got it in the garage. Leave it in the dehydrator. You've ripped it up the following day. You've left it for another 24 hours. You remembered the following day that you've got it. You then take it off. You put it into a plastic bag. And as I say, from experience, you write on the plastic bag 3 portions of whatever, pasta, mince, beef, whatever. Because then when you come to go on a trip, you might go, well, I fancy the Thai green curry tomorrow, and I fancy the fish pie the day after that, and I fancy the stew. So what you would do, or what we do, we'd advise, is we weigh the actual bag that contains the 3 portions. We pour out an approximate portion, and we bag that up and mark that what it is, and then we crop it across through the 3 and put 2 on the plastic bag, and then we shove it back in the freezer, and it stays like that for many years. As I say, you're looking at these here, they're going back to 2006, and they're perfectly edible. So it's good value for money to consider an investment in a dehydrator if you do more than, say, a couple of weeks backpacking. Certainly a week's backpacking will pay for something like the Stockley, a cheaper one, and if there's 2 of you or whatever and you want to do a vast amount, then you're looking at obviously the £200 for the Excalibur. Now, the timer was the other thing I was going to come on to. So a lot of these have timers on them, and I really don't understand why, to be honest, because personally, again, ours is in the garage, and depending on the time of year, it can be a pretty damp environment in there. So why just leave it on until I go in, feel it's completely dry, and then I pack it up? If you had it on a timer, and as I said, I remembered a day later that it was still running or had been running, I might go in and it's dried and then started to absorb some moisture again. So I then have to dry it again, which you can do. You can just keep drying these things should you need to. So the process to maintaining the integrity of the food drying process isn't reliant on a timer. I personally feel a timer is a distraction because it allows you to forget. No, sorry, if you do forget, it allows an error to come into your dehydrating. Whereas if you don't have a timer, it allows you to forget like we do on a regular basis, and we suddenly go, oh, right, we need to do so-and-so. The fact that Rose's Excalibur here, that's got a timer on it, and she can't reach the timer because it's on top of the freezer, so she's forever asking me to go in and turn the timer up. So it gives you an idea that really, if I didn't have a timer, it would just stay on, and that would be it, job done. So if you get one without a timer, you're not losing anything, and if you feel you need a timer at a later date, get one of those plug-in-the-wall timers that you get, which are a £5 or whatever from the DIY shop. It makes life easy. I think Rose has got something to add.
Yeah, the other thing I was going to say is that lots of people say, well, how long will it take a meal to cook or to dehydrate, or how long will it take bananas? Well, you can do approximate, but actually it's really difficult. Depends on the food, water content, sugar content, depends on which dehydrator you've got, on the humidity in the room that dehydrator is, so it really is.
Sorry, nobody heard that. Press the button again. Do that again.
Sorry. Yeah, basically I was saying people often say, well, how long will it take to do a meal, dehydrate a meal or some fruit or whatever, and it's very difficult. You can guesstimate, but it depends on the water content of the food, the sugar content of the food. It depends on which dehydrator you've got, the humidity of the room. So it's really difficult to actually give a definitive answer. I think that's a dal you're eating there, a lentil dal.
It is. Cool. Nice kick to it as well. pot cozies.
Oh, the other thing I was going to say too is dehydrators are great if there's a glut of fruit at the supermarket, or there's a reduction bananas or strawberries or whatever. It's brilliant. That's when I usually buy a pile of mangoes or kiwis or strawberries and get them home and stick them on the dehydrator and then pop them in the freezer, and they make great packets at Christmas too for people. And if you've got kids, they're just ideal for packed lunches. Proper fruit leathers. You can do, I don't think Bob mentioned, you can do fruit leathers too and mixing custard. So often this time of year it's rhubob's coming up, so I'd do rhubarb and custard to take on the TGO if we were doing the TGO. So blackberry and apple, you can combine things, mango and strawberry, make a puree and you just pour it on and then make leathers with it, and those are great for kids without any added sugars whatsoever.
There you go. You got it from the horse's mouth, as it were. So pot cozies is the only other thing that I was going to touch on for people that have not used them. I don't know if you were using them, Russ, when you were over on the PCT, but they are an absolute godsend. They weigh next to nothing, and they maintain the heat in the food. I mean, that's a good half an hour, 40 minutes ago. That is still too hot to touch. That is the type of heat that they retain. So that will save you an immense amount of simmering time on your stoves. So bring the food to the boil, give it a good stir, pop it in the pot cozy, go and put the tent up, get your stuff ready, have a wander around, take a few photographs, come back, check the food, give it a stir, see what it looks like, maybe put it back on the stove again if it needs it, but I very much doubt it would do. Go and do something else, come back, sit down, and then the great thing about the cozy, particularly if you're eating out of the pot, is that you just double layer it like that, and even though that is too hot to touch at the top, I wouldn't like to rest my hand on there too long, you can have that on your lap and eat out of it. So they're a marvellous thing. And it all goes back to Victorian times, something called the hay box. Years and years ago, they used to send their men out to work in the fields, put a casserole in a pot in the middle of a packing box, which are those big square packing boxes filled with hay, and it would keep it insulated and warm right through to food time, which is a little bit of history there for you. Okay, so does anybody have any specific questions, or can we sort of start to wrap this up now? So Russ was saying that I asked, did he have a pot cozy, but he didn't have one, but he does have a pocket rocket. So yeah, give it a shot in the future. It's well worth it. It'll make food a lot better. Oh, the other thing you could do, while I'm on it, with the packet food like Summit to Eat, as I say, it's a great food. I really enjoy this. Two things really. You could dehydrate something that adds to your particular diet. So if you quite like the 5-bean cassoulet, but actually would like to have some mince chucked in there as well, or extra chilies or whatever it may be, extra vegetables, you can dehydrate yourself another packet of bits like that, and then when the time comes, chuck that in there, add the water, zip it up. But the other thing to do with this is also make a pot cozy, use the same material and make a cozy for your packet food, because it will maintain the heat nicely. It will reconstitute the freeze-dried food that's in there and assist obviously being hotter longer. But the most important part, and from experience of using this type of food doing adventure racing, when you get to the bottom, it'll still be warm and not a cold sludge, which is always a great advantage. Right, so that's Russ's question. Anybody else? Gordon is doing something else at the moment. Right, I don't think there's anything else. So what I'll do is say basically thank you. Oh, right, something else come in?
Yeah, Trail Hunter says, what's the most amount of meals you've dehydrated for a trail, and how long were you out there for, and was it worth it?
Easy. 2 weeks on the TGO is a regular thing that we've done over the last 10, 12 years, and 2 weeks worth of food. So what we would do, as Rosa said, as we would normally do our cooking, we would do extra portions and just slowly build up a reservoir in the freezer. Then comes something like the TGO, literally Rose would sit down with her pile of food and I would sit down with my pile of food and decide what we were going to have, what we were going to share as regard the extra bits of component parts, put the rest back in the freezer, and then we would post it off 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of the trip to various places as we walked across Scotland. and the food was always fantastic. There was never ever a problem, no matter where it had been stored, in a post office, in a pub, in a hotel, or in a hostel. So no matter where the food had arrived, the package had arrived to, we didn't have any issues on that score. So I hope that gives you a bit of an idea. But you could certainly dry it off and package it and send it to various places in America, I'm sure. Although you've got to be careful, haven't you, posting food to America, I seem to remember.
Photo Puppets just said, following on from the trail hunter, how much water would you normally expect to carry for rehydrating over a certain time?
I said this at the beginning, so perhaps you just came in a bit later on. The principle that we were using, Photo Puppet, is basically a standard mug being a portion of food. That tends to work as a good example. So we would scoop our portions out of the pot, put that in the dehydrator, and if you watch the video back later on, you'll see the actual food that I've just rehydrated only comes up to about there. So that's the amount of water that's missing, as it were. I wouldn't carry water with me, I just pick it out the stream, boil it up to make sure it's okay, and then chuck it in, basically. Add it to the mix and put the whole lot in the pan, and do what I've said, boil it up and put it in the pot cozy. I hope that's answered that okay. Anybody else? Right, well, okay. Well, if there's any other questions or whatever, do drop me a line on the comment section of either YouTube or Facebook, and I'll do my best to answer that. But I hope that's given you a reasonable overview of some of the things you can do, the cost benefits. Certainly if you're out more than a couple of weeks a year, then it will pay for itself. Obviously it helps from the hassle point of view if you enjoy cooking. That is a big important part. We enjoy our food, enjoy cooking, and enjoy fresh food, and we enjoy sourcing our food to suit our tastes. So it works really well from that point of view. And I think that pretty well covers most things about to dehydrate and rehydrate, as much as I can think of at this moment in time. So I'll just run this tape, and while I have a think for a second. It's a shame, not the right one. Unfortunately, I didn't get it loaded in time. Bit of a panic. So basically what I was going to say, or what the tape was going to say, was that next week we've got 3 streams again on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, 7 o'clock. Monday night I'm going through my stove box of stoves that I've collected over 30 years. So it's a bit of a stove porn night. And that is alcohol stoves, gas stoves and wood burning stoves, for people that might be interested in just seeing a little bit of history, as it were. And then on Wednesday I'm speaking to David Linton, who is telling us all about his new book, which has been published through Cicerone Press, which is The Long Rounds. And we will be giving away a book to somebody who's watching live in the stream. And then on Friday I'm speaking to Lisa Cutcliffe, a name which may not be familiar to you, but she is a forager and wild food expert, and she's going to run through some of the identification tips and things that we should be looking out for springtime, as we're now able to get out for an hour or so at least and have a walk around the countryside before we get back. So unless there's anything else, folks, that's all that's I got to add this particular time, and we will see you next week. Have a nice Easter weekend. Hopefully it's relaxing, and hopefully it's peaceful. May we all get through this COVID disaster with minimal concern. All the best now. Bye for now. I don't have any sound.